Welcome to Mystery Manor Narratives. I'm your host, Evelyn Hawthorne. Tonight, we're diving into a captivating tale of intrigue and deduction, perfect for those cozy evenings with a cup of tea. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our weekly mysteries. And tell me in the comments below where you're listening from. Perhaps a foggy London street or a quiet countryside cottage? Let's settle in for a long, relaxing journey with the Vanishing Soprano of Larkspur Theatre, a Hercule Poirot murder mystery. This is a full-length story, divided into 10 chapters for easy following. I'll read it slowly and deliberately, painting each scene with care. Grab your notebook if you're the type to solve along. There are clues aplenty. And now, without further ado, Chapter 1, The Glittering Premiere. In the heart of 1920s London, where the fog wove through the cobblestone streets like a thief in the night, and gas lamps cast trembling shadows, stood the Larkspur Theatre. It was a grand monument to art and ambition, its facade adorned with marble cherubs and gilded arches that gleamed even in the damp haze. The year was 1927, and the city buzzed with anticipation for the premiere of La Voce Perduta, an opera said to weave love and betrayal into a tapestry of sounds so exquisite it could stir the soul to tears. The theater's velvet curtains and polished mahogany balconies promised an escape from the mundane, a portal to passion and tragedy for London's elite, who arrived in droves, their furs and jewels catching the light like stars in a velvet sky. At the center of this fervor was Isabella Voss, a soprano whose voice was a force of nature, capable of shattering crystal with its clarity or soothing hearts with its warmth. Born in a modest Milanese village, Isabella had risen to become Europe's darling, her raven hair cascading in waves, her emerald eyes sharp with intelligence, and her presence commanding every room. Her performances were the stuff of legend, but so were the tales of her tempestuous life. Whispers of rivalries with other singers, fleeting affairs with composers, and a fortune amassed through canny investments in the nascent film industry. She was a woman who lived as boldly as she sang, fetching props and soothing tempers. Timothy nodded, his earnest face flushed as he darted off to check the orchestra's tuning. Backstage, the air was thick with the scent of grease paint, roses, and anticipation. Isabella's dressing room was a sanctuary of opulence, a stark contrast to the cluttered corridors of ropes and pulleys. Mirrors, framed in gold, reflected her poised figure. A chaise longue draped in crimson silk invited rest, and a vanity overflowed with perfumes, powders, and jewels that glittered like a dragon's hoard. Isabella sat before the mirror, humming scales that floated through the walls, each note a promise of the magic to come. She adjusted a diamond hairpin, her movements precise, her expression serene yet focused, as if she were preparing for battle rather than a performance. The cast and crew orbiting her were a constellation of ambition and secrets. Elena Moreau, the understudy soprano, lingered in the wings, her delicate French features framed by blonde curls. Her voice was nearly as divine as Isabella's, but she remained in the shadows, her eyes betraying a flicker of envy. Once Isabella's protégée, Elena had fallen out with her mentor over a rumored affair with a Parisian conductor, a wound that festered beneath her polite smiles. She adjusted her costume, a simpler version of Isabella's, and whispered to a stagehand about her readiness to step in, if needed. Victor Langford, Isabella's husband, cut a dashing figure in his tailored suit, his dark hair slicked back, his hands restless as he reviewed sheet music. A composer whose symphonies had once rivaled Elgar's, Victor's star had dimmed, overshadowed by his wife's brilliance. Their marriage was a public triumph, but private quarrels over money and fidelity echoed through their Mayfair home. Victor's latest work, a suite for La Voce Perduta, was his chance at redemption, but his tense jaw suggested other burdens. Silas Crowe, the stagehand, moved with a limp through the backstage maze, his weathered face etched with lines from a hard life. A veteran of the Great War, or so he claimed, Silas was master of the theatre's machinery, handling trapdoors, pulleys, and levers that brought illusions to life. His eyes, cold and calculating, lingered on Isabella's door, struck its first notes, tuning their instruments in a discordant prelude. An unexpected guest arrived. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective, with his egg-shaped head, meticulously waxed mustache, and suit as pristine as his reputation, stepped into the lobby. He had been invited by his old friend, Captain Arthur Hastings, a jovial man with a penchant for the dramatic. Hastings, already seated in a private box, had persuaded Poirot to attend for the pleasure of the opera and, perhaps, the chance to observe human nature at its most theatrical. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his eyes twinkling as he adjusted his tie, "the stage is a microcosm of life, where every gesture hides a truth or a lie." They took their seats, Poirot's keen gaze sweeping the audience, lords and ladies, critics with notebooks, and a scattering of bohemians drawn by Isabella's fame. The house lights dimmed, and the curtain rose to a wave of applause. Isabella took the stage, her presence electrifying. Her opening aria soared, each note a thread weaving the audience into her spell. The story of La Voce Perduta unfolded, a tale of a doomed lover's pact, and Isabella embodied its heroine with a passion that silenced even the most jaded critic. Her voice, rich and resonant, filled the theater, drawing gasps and tears. But as the first act neared its close, Isabella retreated to her dressing room for the intermission. She locked the door behind her, a ritual to ensure solitude, shutting out admirers and the chaos of backstage. Hargrove had posted a guard, a burly stagehand named Tom, outside her door to enforce her privacy. Tom swore no one approached, his heavy boots rooted to the spot. The orchestra played a soft interlude. The audience sipped champagne, and the theater hummed with anticipation for the second act. At 8:45 p.m., Isabella entered her room. At 8:47, Tom heard the bolt slide shut. By 9:05, when the stage manager knocked for her cue, there was no answer. The knocking grew frantic, drawing a crowd of cast and crew. Hargrove, sweating profusely, ordered the door forced open. It yielded with a groan, overlapping in a discordant symphony of questions and accusations. Reginald Hargrove, the theater manager, stood at the center of the storm, his face pale as chalk, his cigar forgotten and smoldering on the floor. "This is catastrophic," he stammered, tugging at his collar. "Isabella gone. The production is ruined." Timothy Blaine, his assistant, hovered nearby, clutching a clipboard as if it were a lifeline. His youthful face, usually eager and earnest, was taut with anxiety as he darted between stagehands, barking orders to keep the crew from dissolving into chaos. "Stay calm, everyone," he called, though his voice trembled. "We'll find her. She can't have gone far." His words carried little conviction, and the gathered cast and crew exchanged glances heavy with doubt. The dressing room door stood ajar, its lock splintered from being forced open. Inside, the scene was as Isabella had left it, or so it seemed. The gold-framed mirrors reflected the flickering gaslight, the crimson chaise longue sat untouched, and the vanity held its array of perfumes and jewels, now joined by the spilled vial and the blood-red rose. The guard, Tom, stood rigidly outside, his broad shoulders squared, but his eyes wide with unease. "I swear, sir," he told Hargrove, "no one went in or out. I was right here the whole time, from when she locked the door at 8:47 till they broke it down." Into this maelstrom stepped Hercule Poirot, his diminutive figure cutting through the chaos with the calm precision of a surgeon's blade. His polished shoes clicked on the hardwood floor, his mustache gleamed under the light, and his green eyes sparkled with curiosity. Captain Arthur Hastings trailed behind, his ruddy face a mix of concern and excitement at the prospect of a mystery. "Mon ami," Poirot said, raising a hand to silence the clamor. "Panic is the enemy of clarity. Hercule Poirot is here, and he shall unravel this enigma. Let us proceed with order." Hargrove, flustered but relieved by Poirot's authority, nodded vigorously. "Anything you need, Mr. Poirot, just find her." Moments later, Inspector sniffing cautiously. Beneath the floral notes was a faint, acrid undertone, chloroform perhaps, or something more sinister. The rose, freshly cut with thorns intact, lay beside it, its crimson petals stark against the vanity's white lace. "Curious," Poirot murmured. "This rose is no mere decoration. It speaks of intention." He turned to the room itself, his movements methodical. "Observe, Hastings," he said, pointing to the largest mirror. "It is slightly askew, as if bumped in haste. And here, on the carpet, a faint indentation, perhaps from a heavy object moved." He knelt, running a gloved finger along the floor, then stood and examined the lock, its bolt still extended despite the splintered frame. "The door was locked from within, yet Madame Voss is gone. This is no ordinary disappearance." The suspects were summoned to the green room, a cramped space cluttered with costumes and props. Elena Moreau sat delicately on a stool, her blonde curls framing a face streaked with tears. She clutched a handkerchief, her voice soft but unsteady. "Isabella was like a sister to me, until she turned on me in Paris. But I'd never harm her." Her claim of affection clashed with rumors of a bitter rivalry, fueled by a shared lover and professional jealousy. Elena said she'd been rehearsing in the wings during the intermission, but no one could fully corroborate her whereabouts. Victor Langford, Isabella's husband, paced the room, his hands clenching and unclenching. His handsome features were drawn, his eyes red-rimmed. "My wife, gone? It's unthinkable. We had our struggles, yes, but I loved her. Our finances were tight, but I'd never—" His voice broke, yet whispers among the crew suggested he stood to inherit Isabella's considerable estate, a motive not easily dismissed. Victor claimed he'd been in his private box, reviewing his score, but a stagehand recalled seeing him near the dressing room earlier that evening, arguing with Isabella. Silas Crowe leaned against the wall, his grizzled face impassive, but his eyes sharp. He insisted, gesturing to Timothy for confirmation, but his debts loomed large, and Isabella's contract included a clause for a substantial payout if she became incapacitated. Timothy, loyal but nervous, nodded. He was with me, mostly. Poirot questioned each in turn, his questions sharp yet polite. Elena's tears seemed genuine, but her alibi was shaky. A stagehand thought she'd slipped away during the intermission. Victor's distress felt real, but his argument with Isabella raised questions. Silas's gruff denials were undercut by his access to the theatre's hidden corners. Lady Beatrice's imperiousness faltered when Poirot noted the missing bead, which she dismissed as a wardrobe mishap. Hargrove's alibi held, but his sweating brow and evasive glances suggested more than managerial stress. As the night deepened, Poirot retraced the timeline with Tom's help. At 8:45 p.m., Isabella entered her room. At 8:47, the bolt slid shut. At 9:05, the stage manager knocked, no answer. By 9:10, the door was forced open. The guards swore no one approached, yet a chorus girl claimed to have seen a shadowy figure near the ventilation grate in the corridor moments before the discovery. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A shadow, you say?" Most interesting. He returned to the dressing room, inspecting the ventilation grate, too small for a person but large enough for a tool or a clue. The carpet's indentation intrigued him further. It suggested something heavy, perhaps a trunk or a panel had been shifted. The mirror's misalignment hinted at a struggle or a hurried exit. "This is no vanishing act," Poirot said to Hastings. "It is a performance, staged with care. But by whom? And to what end?" The police, under Japp's direction, began cataloguing the room's contents. Poirot halted them at the vanity, lifting the rose with a handkerchief. "This flower," he said, "is a message. From whom, we shall discover." He pocketed a small fragment of glass from the vial, its edge sharp and irregular, as if broken deliberately. The theatre's air grew heavier, the weight of secrets pressing down. As the suspects dispersed, assurances of a temporary delay, their murmurs of discontent echoing in the emptying auditorium. Backstage, the air was thick with tension, the cast and crew moving like ghosts through the corridors, their faces etched with exhaustion and suspicion. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the hour, stood in the center of the dressing room, his sharp eyes scanning every detail as if the walls themselves might whisper the truth. Captain Arthur Hastings hovered nearby, his notepad filled with scribbled observations, though he admitted most were inspired by Poirot's probing questions. Inspector Japp, nursing a cup of tepid tea, coordinated his constables, who were combing the theatre for evidence. "This place is a maze," Japp grumbled, rubbing his temples. "Trapdoors, hidden stairs, feels like a ruddy conjurer's box." Poirot, adjusting his gloves, offered a faint smile. "Precisely, Inspector. And in such a box, the trick lies in understanding the mechanism." Poirot's first task was to deepen the investigation into the suspects, their pasts, and their connections to Isabella. He requested dossiers from Japp, who grumbled but complied, leveraging Scotland Yard's resources. As the morning progressed, Poirot gathered the suspects in the green room once more, their faces a gallery of unease. Elena Moreau sat with her hands folded, her blonde curls slightly dishevelled, her eyes darting to the door. Victor Langford leaned against a prop table, his composer's hands restless, his jaw tight. Silas Crowe slouched in a corner, his limp more pronounced in the morning light. Lady Beatrice Farnsworth perched on a chair, her sapphire gown replaced by a severe black dress, her lips pursed. Reginald Hargrove paced, his moustache twitching as he muttered about the theatre's looming ruin. Poirot began with Elena, his tone gentle but piercing. "Mademoiselle Moreau, tell me of your time with Madame Voss in Paris." Elena's cheeks flushed. "We were close once," she said, her French accent softening her words. "She mentored me, taught me to command the stage, but she changed, grew jealous when I landed a role she wanted." Private box during the intermission was shaky. An usher recalled him stepping out, possibly toward the dressing room. Silas Crowe's gruff exterior cracked under Poirot's scrutiny. "I'm just a stagehand," he growled. "Fixed the locks, worked the pulleys. Ain't my fault she's gone." But Japp's dossier revealed a lie. Silas's wartime injury was a fiction. He had deserted in 1916, living under an assumed name until the theatre hired him. His knowledge of the stage's mechanics, trapdoors, vents, and pulleys, made him a key figure, and his old grudge against Isabella for spurning him added motive. "She thought she was too good for me," he muttered, avoiding Poirot's gaze. Lady Beatrice Farnsworth maintained her icy composure. "I was in the audience, applauding like everyone else," she said, fanning herself despite the chill. Her fortune, Japp discovered, was dwindling. Her patronage of the Larkspur was a desperate bid to maintain status. Isabella's rejection of her film venture had not only bruised her ego, but threatened her financial schemes. The missing bead from her necklace, found near the dressing room door, suggested she'd been closer to the scene than she admitted. "It must have fallen earlier," she said dismissively, but her fingers tightened on her fan. Reginald Hargrove's debts were laid bare. The theatre was on the brink of bankruptcy, and Isabella's contract was his lifeline. "I was in the lobby, as Timothy said," he protested, but Japp's men found cigar ash in the corridor near the dressing room, contradicting his claim. Hargrove's contract with Isabella included a payout clause if she couldn't perform, a detail he downplayed. "I'd never harm her," he said, but his sweating palms told another story. Poirot returned to the dressing room, determined to uncover its secrets. The locked room puzzle fascinated him. The bolted door, the barred windows, the absence of passages. He examined the ventilation grate again, noting its screws were slightly loose, as if tampered with. The carpet's indentation intrigued him. He measured it, estimated, "Meet me at midnight, V." Victor paled when shown it. "I didn't write this," he insisted, but his handwriting bore a striking resemblance. Poirot tucked the note away, suspecting a plant. Another clue surfaced. A chorus girl, nervous and hesitant, reported seeing a shadowy figure near the ventilation grate at 8:50 p.m., just after Isabella locked her door. "It was too dark to see who," she whispered, "but they moved quickly, like they didn't want to be seen." Poirot interviewed Tom, the guard, again. His story held. He'd stood watch from 8:45 to 9:10, hearing nothing but the bolt at 8:47. Yet Poirot noticed a faint scuff on Tom's boots, matching the corridor's polish. Had he stepped away briefly? Tom denied it, but his eyes flickered. Poirot then spoke to Timothy Blaine, who admitted Hargrove had left the lobby briefly to check on a lighting issue. "Only for a moment," Timothy said. But the timeline was tightening. The perfume vial, still on the vanity, drew Poirot's attention. He sent it to a chemist for analysis, suspecting the acrid undertone was more than chloroform. The rose, too, was significant. Its thorns were sharp, its stem freshly cut, suggesting it was placed deliberately. A symbol, Poirot mused, perhaps of love, or vengeance. He recalled Isabella's past, a Milanese lover, long dead, who gifted her roses. Was this an echo of that history? As the morning wore on, Poirot pieced together the timeline. Isabella entered at 8:45, locked the door at 8:47, and was gone by 9:05. The shadowy figure, the loose grate, the moved mirror, all pointed to a staged act. But the how and why remained elusive. The suspect's motives intertwined like the theater's ropes. Elena's jealousy, Victor's financial strain, Silas's grudge, Beatrice's pride, Hargrove's desperation. Each had opportunity, each had secrets. Poirot stepped onto the stage, the empty auditorium stretching before him like a silent jury. "The truth," he said to Hastings, "is hidden in the shadows of the past. We must illuminate them." He resolved. Master. Inspector Japp, meanwhile, barked orders to his constables, who combed the backstage for overlooked evidence, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Poirot returned to the dressing room, the epicenter of the mystery, where the locked room puzzle continued to defy logic. The bolted door, the barred windows, the absence of secret passages, all pointed to an impossible crime. The spilled perfume vial and the blood-red rose remained on the vanity, their significance tantalizingly unclear. Poirot's gloved fingers traced the mirror's edge, noting its slight misalignment. "This room,"
he said to Hastings, is a canvas of deception. Every detail is a brushstroke, but the picture is not yet complete. New clues emerged as Poirot's scrutiny intensified. A strand of blonde hair, fine and slightly curled, was found caught in the hinge of the vanity's drawer. It matched Elena Moreau's hair, not Isabella's dark tresses. When confronted, Elena's composure faltered. "I visited her dressing room earlier, before the performance," she admitted, her French accent thick with nerves. "We spoke briefly, about the opera, nothing more. I left before she went on stage." Her claim was plausible, but no one could confirm her departure, and her presence so close to the crime scene raised Poirot's suspicions. Was the hair a careless oversight, or a deliberate misdirection? Victor Langford provided a new piece of the puzzle. A telegram from his publisher, time-stamped at 8:50 p.m., confirming a meeting about his latest composition. "I was in my box, reading it," he insisted, producing the crumpled paper. But Poirot's keen eye noticed the ink was smudged, as if handled hastily or forged. "A convenient alibi, Monsieur Langford," Poirot remarked. "But ink does not lie as easily as men." Victor's face reddened, and he muttered about misplacing the original in his distress. Silas Crowe, the stagehand, drew Poirot's attention to the theatre's underbelly. He led the detective to a cramped sub-stage area, where pulleys and trapdoors facilitated the opera's illusion.
Near the dressing room, perhaps to overhear or intervene. Her financial desperation, coupled with Isabella's rejection of her business proposal, painted a motive as vivid as the sapphire gown she'd worn the previous night. Reginald Hargrove's alibi weakened further. The cigar ash found in the corridor contradicted his claim of remaining in the lobby. When pressed, he admitted to stepping backstage to check on a faulty spotlight. "I was only gone a moment," he said. But Timothy Blaine, his assistant, hesitated when asked to confirm the timing. "He was busy," Timothy mumbled, his loyalty strained. Hargrove's debts and the payout clause in Isabella's contract loomed larger, and Poirot noted his nervous habit of twisting his cufflinks, a telltale sign of guilt or fear. A second note surfaced, tucked behind a prop mirror in the green room. It read, "Betrayal costs dear, S." Silas scoffed when shown it. "Someone's trying to pin this on me," he growled, claiming the handwriting was a forgery. Poirot compared it to the earlier note signed V and found subtle differences in the pen strokes, suggesting a single author attempting to mimic multiple hands. A clever ruse, Poirot mused, but not clever enough. The investigation widened as Poirot explored the theatre's history. The Larkspur, built in the 1890s, had once hosted magic shows, its stage rigged with mirrors and false panels for vanishing acts. In the prop room, Poirot found a dusty blueprint, revealing a network of service tunnels, one passing near the dressing room's foundation. Though sealed, the tunnel's proximity hinted at a forgotten access point. A stagehand recalled an old story. A magician had once vanished mid-performance, only to reappear in the lobby thanks to a hidden lift. Could such a trick be revived? Poirot asked Hastings, his eyes alight with possibility. Another clue emerged, a faint smear of grease paint on the dressing room's carpet, near the indentation. It matched the type used by the chorus, but Isabella rarely wore such heavy makeup. Poirot suspected it belonged to someone else, perhaps Elena, who had admitted to visiting earlier, or another intruder. The ventilation grate, with its loosened screws. Chemist's report on the perfume vial arrived, confirming Poirot's suspicions. It contained a trace of a rare poison, odorless, but deadly when inhaled in high doses. The vial's broken edge suggested it had been tampered with, perhaps to release the toxin during Isabella's preparations. The rose, analyzed by a botanist, was identified as a rare hybrid, grown only in a private greenhouse owned by a London aristocrat, possibly linked to Lady Beatrice's circle. Its thorns, unusually sharp, bore a trace of blood, too small for analysis, but enough to hint at a struggle. Poirot's mind wove these clues into a tapestry. The blonde hair pointed to Elena, but its placement felt staged. Victor's telegram was suspect, its timing too convenient. Silas's trapdoor knowledge suggested a mechanical solution, yet the locked mechanism raised doubts. Beatrice's beads and the fabric scrap placed her near the scene, while Hargrove's ash and shaky alibi deepened his involvement. The notes, likely forgeries, were designed to mislead, but their purpose remained unclear. As evening fell, Poirot stood on the stage, the empty auditorium a silent witness. "This is a theatre of illusions," he told Hastings, "where every clue is a prop, every suspect an actor. But the truth cannot hide forever." He resolved to test the trapdoor mechanism and search the service tunnels, suspecting a hidden exit. The grease paint, the fabric, the poison, all pointed to a carefully orchestrated act, but the motive and method remained elusive. The suspects, dismissed for the night, lingered in the green room, their glances heavy with distrust. Elena clutched her handkerchief, Victor stared at his sheet music, Silas polished a pulley, Beatrice adjusted her shawl, and Hargrove mopped his brow. Poirot watched them, his grey cells humming. The mystery of Isabella Voss was a labyrinth, its walls lined with echoes of betrayal and illusion. He would navigate it, step by meticulous step, until the curtain fell on the truth. Chapter 5. The Understudy's Rise. The Larkspur Theatre, now cloaked in the telegram, the loose ventilation grate, the grease paint smear, and the poisoned perfume vial formed a constellation of clues, yet the pattern was incomplete. Poirot's latest discovery, the rare rose linked to an aristocratic greenhouse, had deepened the intrigue, pointing to a connection beyond the theatre's walls. "This is no simple crime," he told Hastings, his mustache twitching with focus. "It is a performance within a performance, and we must find the script." A new complication arose when Elena Moreau, the understudy soprano, insisted on taking the stage for the evening's performance. "We must honor Isabella," she declared in the green room, her voice steady despite her reddened eyes. "The show must go on, or the theatre will collapse." Reginald Hargrove, his face a mask of desperation, agreed, seeing no other way to salvage his investment. The cast, though shaken, rallied, and the audience, lured back by promises of a tribute to Isabella, filled the seats with a mix of curiosity and unease. Poirot, intrigued by Elena's resolve, allowed the performance to proceed, sensing it might flush out new leads. "Watch closely, Hastings," he said, settling into a private box. "The stage reveals what the shadows conceal." The curtain rose, and Elena stepped into Isabella's role, her blonde curls gleaming under the spotlight. Her voice, though not as transcendent as Isabella's, carried a haunting clarity, and the audience leaned forward, captivated. But midway through her aria, a piercing scream shattered the melody. A stage light suspended by a heavy cable crashed to the stage, missing Elena by inches. The audience gasped. The orchestra faltered, and chaos erupted. Poirot sprang to his feet, his eyes narrowing. "Sabotage," he muttered, rushing backstage with Hastings and Japp. The fallen light was no accident. The cable showed clean cuts, as if severed with a blade. Silas Crowe, who oversaw the rigging, swore he'd checked it that morning. "It was secure," he growled, his limp pronounced as he gestured to the pulleys. Poirot examined the cable, noting the precision of the cut, too deliberate for wear. "Someone wished to harm Mademoiselle Moreau," he said. or to distract us. The incident confronted, admitted the quarrel. She was angry about my debts, he said, his voice low. But I left her alive and well. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Victor's admission placed him at the scene, and his telegram alibi was crumbling as the publisher confirmed no meeting had occurred. Silas Crow's past yielded another twist. A constable uncovered a record of his gambling debts, paid off recently by an anonymous benefactor. When pressed, Silas admitted Lady Beatrice Farnsworth had settled his accounts. She needed my skills, he said cryptically, refusing to elaborate. Beatrice, questioned separately, dismissed it as charity. I support many in the theatre, she said, but her tight smile betrayed unease. The pearl beads and blue fabric near the dressing room tied her closer to the crime, and her connection to Silas suggested a deeper alliance. Hargrove's financial troubles came into sharper focus. A ledger found in his office showed discrepancies in the theatre's accounts, funds siphoned to cover personal debts. Timothy Blaine, visibly uncomfortable, admitted Hargrove had pressured him to fudge the books. He said it was temporary, Timothy whispered, until Isabella's run paid off. The payout clause in her contract loomed larger, and Poirot noted Hargrove's cigar ash near the substage, where the trapdoor mechanism lay. A false clue surfaced. An earring, one of Isabella's signature diamonds, was found in Victor's coat pocket during a search. I've never seen it, he protested, his face paling. Poirot examined it, noting its pristine condition, no scratches or wear, as if placed deliberately. A clumsy attempt to incriminate, he said, suspecting a plant. But by whom? Elena, to shift blame? Beatrice, to protect her interests? Or another hand entirely? Poirot returned to the substage, testing the trapdoor Silas had shown him. The lock, though scratched, held firm, but a faint oil residue suggested recent use. He followed the service tunnel nearby, its walls damp and lined with cobwebs. At its end he found a concealed hatch, rusted but functional, leading to a basement storeroom. Inside was a crate, its lid ajar, containing a folded cloak. Love letter found in Elena's dressing room, dated weeks earlier. It was over, Elena insisted, but her flushed cheeks suggested otherwise. Silas, when pressed, admitted to blackmailing Hargrove over the ledger discrepancies, using his knowledge of the theatre's tunnels to eavesdrop. Beatrice's payments to Silas hinted at a quid pro quo, perhaps access to the trapdoor, or silence about her financial woes. Poirot gathered the suspects in the auditorium, the empty stage, a stark backdrop. This crime, he said, his voice clear and deliberate, is a tapestry of greed, envy, and betrayal. Each of you holds a thread. He paced, outlining the clues. The blonde hair, the forged notes, the cut cable, the poisoned vial, the cloak in the crate. But the body, he added, is the missing act. Without it, the curtain cannot fall. As night deepened, Poirot tested a theory. He asked Silas to demonstrate the trapdoor's mechanism, watching his hands closely. The lever moved smoothly, but Silas hesitated, as if hiding a step. Poirot then examined the mirror in the dressing room, tapping its frame until a faint click revealed a hidden latch. Behind it was a narrow recess, too small for a person, but large enough for tools or a weapon. The theatre itself is complicit, Poirot said to Hastings. Its secrets are its stagehands. The suspect's alibis crumbled further. Elena's rehearsal timeline had gaps. Victor's quarrel placed him at the scene. Silas's debts tied him to Beatrice. Hargrove's ash and ledger pointed to desperation. The crashed light, Poirot suspected, was a distraction, staged to disrupt the investigation, or eliminate Elena as a witness. But to what? The truth lay just out of reach, hidden in the theatre's labyrinth of illusions. Poirot stood in the dressing room, the rose in his hand. "This flower," he said, "is a signature. The poison, the cloak, the trapdoor, all part of a grand deception." He turned to Hastings. His windows, no apparent passages, had grown more intricate with each clue. The blonde hair, the smudged telegram, the poisoned perfume, the rare rose, the cut stage light cable, and the blue cloak in the basement crate. The crashed light, narrowly missing Eleanor Moreau, had shifted the investigation, suggesting either a second target or a calculated distraction. Poirot's mind, ever agile, wove these threads into a pattern, though the final shape remained elusive. "This is a theater of mirrors," he told Hastings, his voice soft but resolute. "And mirrors, mon ami, reflect both truth and illusion." Poirot gathered the suspects in the auditorium, the empty seats stretching before them like a silent jury. Eleanor Moreau sat with her hands clasped, her blonde curls framing a face pale with strain. Victor Langford leaned forward, his composer's hands twitching, his eyes haunted. Silas Crowe slouched against a pillar, his grizzled features set in a scowl. Lady Beatrice Farnsworth sat erect, her black dress stark against her pearl necklace, her gaze defiant. Reginald Hargrove paced, his cufflinks glinting as he twisted them nervously. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his accented voice cutting through the tension. "The disappearance of Madame Voss is no mere vanishing act. It is a murder, staged with the precision of an opera." A murmur rippled through the group, but Poirot raised a hand. "The dressing room tells the story. The mirror, askew, hides a secret." He had returned to the room earlier, tapping the mirror's frame until a faint click revealed a concealed panel. Behind it was a narrow recess, not large enough for a person, but sufficient to hide a mechanism or a weapon. Now, with the suspects watching, Poirot demonstrated. He pressed a hidden catch, and the mirror swung outward, revealing a false wall with a sliding panel. Beyond it was a cramped compartment, just large enough for a body. "Here," he said, "is where Madame Voss was hidden." The revelation stunned the group. Japp's men searched the compartment, finding traces of blood and a faint scent of the poisoned perfume. Isabella had not vanished. She had been murdered in her dressing room, poisoned by Me at Midnight, V, and Betrayal Costs Dear, S, were forgeries, their handwriting a clumsy mimicry to sow confusion. But who had orchestrated this elaborate deception? Poirot paced the stage, his eyes scanning the suspects. "Each of you had motive," he said. "Mademoiselle Moreau, your jealousy of Madame Voss's fame, and your presence in her dressing room." Eleanor gasped, shaking her head. "Monsieur Langford, your financial ruin and the quarrel with your wife." Victor's face darkened, but he remained silent. "Monsieur Crowe, your knowledge of the theatre's secrets and your old grudge." Silas snorted, his eyes cold. "Lady Beatrice, your spurned pride and dwindling fortune." Beatrice's fan snapped shut. "Monsieur Hargrove, your debts and the payout clause." Hargrove stopped pacing, his face ashen. Poirot's gaze settled on Eleanor. "Mademoiselle, you were Madame Voss's heir, were you not? A secret kept from all but her solicitor." Eleanor's eyes widened, her hands trembling. Japp's dossier had uncovered a will, naming Eleanor as a beneficiary of Isabella's estate, a fact she had hidden. "You loved her once," Poirot continued, "but envy turned to hate. You visited her dressing room, lacing the perfume with poison." Eleanor sobbed, denying it, but her shaky alibi and the blonde hair pointed to her involvement. Yet Poirot paused, his finger raised. "But you did not act alone. Monsieur Crowe, your hands worked the mirror's mechanism." Silas's scowl deepened. but he said nothing. Poirot revealed the oil residue on the panel's catch matched Silas's toolkit, and his gambling debts, paid by Beatrice, suggested a bargain. "You provided the means," Poirot said, "for a price." The true mastermind, however, was another. Poirot turned to Lady Beatrice. "Madame, your family built this theatre. You knew of the mirror's secret, passed down through generations. The blueprint in the prop room, stamped with the Farnsworth crest, confirmed her ancestors' design. The pearl beads, the blue cloak, the rare rose from her greenhouse, all tied her to the crime. You orchestrated the murder," Poirot declared. "Planted the Heron notes. The cloak concealed their movements through the service tunnel. By 9:05, when the door was forced, the room appeared empty, the rose and vial left as cryptic clues. The crashed stage light, Poirot deduced, was Silas's attempt to eliminate Eleanor, who knew too much. "You grew greedy, Monsieur Crow," he said, "or fearful." Silas's silence was damning. The forged notes and planted earring were Beatrice's touches, meant to confuse and implicate others. Hargrove's ash and Victor's quarrel were distractions, their motives real, but incidental. Japp, stunned, ordered his men to secure the compartment's evidence. The blood traces confirmed Isabella's fate, and the poison's residue sealed the case. "You've done it again, Poirot," he said, shaking his head. "But how do you see through this mess?" Poirot smiled faintly. "The little grey cells, Inspector. They see what the eyes cannot." The suspects sat in stunned silence, their roles in the tragedy exposed. Eleanor's tears, Victor's despair, Silas's defiance, Beatrice's defeat, Hargrove's relief, all played out like the final act of an opera. Poirot stepped to the stage's edge, the auditorium dark and silent. "The mirror," he said to Hastings, "showed us the truth, but only when we looked beyond the reflection. This crime was a performance, and now the curtain falls." Chapter 7. Justice Served. The Larkspur Theatre, bathed in the dim glow of its chandeliers as night deepened over London, stood as a somber witness to the unraveling of Isabella Voss's murder. The fog outside had thickened, muffling the city's sounds, while inside, the auditorium's silence was broken only by the faint creak of floorboards and the murmurs of Inspector Japp's constables securing the scene. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit slightly rumpled from hours of investigation, stood on the stage, his green eyes gleaming with the quiet triumph of a puzzle solved. Captain Arthur Hastings sat in the front row, his notepad forgotten, his face a mixture of awe and relief. The suspects, Eleanor Moreau, Victor Langford, Silas Crow, Lady Beatrice Farnsworth, close. Inspector Japp, his skepticism replaced by grudging admiration, joined Poirot on stage. "You have outdone yourself, Poirot," he said, adjusting his hat. "But we need confessions, evidence, something to hold up in court." Poirot nodded, his moustache twitching. "The evidence is here, Inspector, in the theatre's secrets and the suspects' hearts. Let us confront them." The suspects were summoned to the auditorium, their faces a gallery of emotions. Elena's tear-streaked resignation, Victor's hollow despair, Silas's defiant scowl, Beatrice's brittle composure, and Hargrove's nervous relief. Poirot stood centre stage, the spotlight casting his shadow long and sharp. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his accented voice carrying the weight of authority, "the murder of Isabella Voss was a performance of deception. But the curtain has fallen. Let us review the act." He began with the mechanics of the crime. At 8:45 p.m., Isabella entered her dressing room, locking the door at 8:47. Elena, driven by envy and the promise of inheritance, had laced the perfume vial with a rare alkaloid poison earlier that day. As Isabella prepared, inhaling the toxin, she collapsed, her death swift and silent. Silas, using his knowledge of the theatre's old magic mechanisms, opened the mirror's hidden panel, sliding her body into the concealed compartment. Beatrice, the mastermind, had overseen the plan, planting the blonde hair and forged notes to mislead. The blue cloak found in the basement crate concealed their movements through the service tunnel, and the rose laced with the same poison was her signature, a taunt rooted in her aristocratic connections. Poirot turned to Elena. "Mademoiselle, you loved Madame Voss, but your ambition consumed you. Her will naming you heir was your motive." Elena's shoulders slumped, her sobs breaking the silence. "I didn't want to kill her," she whispered. "Beatrice promised me the stage, the fame. I only gave her the vial." Her confession, though partial, confirmed her role.
Composure cracked, her hands trembling.
"Isabella found my accounts," she said, her voice barely audible. "She was going to ruin me. I had no choice." Her admission, wrung from pride, was the final nail in the coffin. The forged notes, Poirot explained, were Beatrice's attempt to implicate Victor and Silas, deflecting suspicion. The earring in Victor's pocket was another plant, meant to exploit his quarrel with Isabella. Victor, cleared of murder but guilty of deceit about his debts, hung his head. "I failed her," he said, his voice breaking. Hargrove, though not a killer, had his own sins. The ledger discrepancies and cigar ash placed him near the scene, but his motive was financial survival, not murder. "I only wanted the theatre to live," he muttered, his cufflinks still twisting in his fingers. Japp's men secured the evidence: the poisoned vial, the rose, the cloak, the blood traces in the compartment. The chemist's report confirmed the alkaloid's potency, and the greenhouse records tied the rose to Beatrice's estate. The mirror's panel, a relic of the theatre's magic days, was photographed, its mechanism documented. "It's airtight," Japp said, clapping Poirot on the shoulder. "They'll swing for this, or at least see bars." Poirot addressed the red herrings. The blonde hair meant to incriminate Elena was a misstep. Her presence in the dressing room was real, but the hair was planted to exaggerate her guilt. The notes, with their mismatched handwriting, were Beatrice's attempt to muddy the waters. The crashed stage light, Silas's doing, was a desperate bid to silence Elena, who had begun to waver under pressure. "Each deception," Poirot said, "was a mirror, reflecting a false truth. But the little grey cells see beyond." The arrests were swift. Beatrice, Elena, and Silas were taken into custody, their roles as mastermind, accomplice, and enabler clear. Victor, though free, faced ruin, his marriage and career in tatters. Hargrove, spared arrest, was left to salvage the theatre, his dreams humbled by scandal. Timothy Blaine, loyal but shaken, vowed to bear its stage ready for a new act, one free of deception. The case closed with a quiet finality. The newspapers would soon blaze with headlines: "Soprano's murder solved by Belgian sleuth." The Larkspur would reopen, Eleanor's understudy role filled by another, the opera's tragedy now a footnote to a real one. Poirot, ever unassuming, would slip back into the shadows, his mind already turning to the next puzzle. For now, justice was served, the curtain drawn, and the theatre cleansed of its darkest act. The Larkspur Theatre, bathed in the muted glow of a London dawn, stood like a weary actor after a long performance, its grandeur tempered by the weight of recent revelations. The fog outside lingered, softening the city's edges, while inside, The auditorium's silence was heavy with the aftermath of Isabella Voss's murder. Hercule Poirot, his suit as impeccable as ever, despite the sleepless hours, paced the stage, his green eyes narrowing as he sifted through the case's final threads. Captain Arthur Hastings sat in a front-row seat, his notepad open but untouched, his brow furrowed with unease. Inspector Japp, coordinating his constables in the lobby, muttered about paperwork, his earlier triumph tempered by a nagging sense that the puzzle wasn't fully solved. The arrests of Lady Beatrice Farnsworth, Eleanor Moreau, and Silas Crowe had brought closure, yet Poirot's restless mind hinted at unresolved shadows. The dressing room, now a crime scene cordoned off by Japp's men, held the secrets that had unraveled the murder. The poisoned perfume vial, the blood-red rose, the hidden mirror panel, and the blue cloak in the basement crate. Beatrice, the mastermind, had orchestrated Isabella's death to protect her fraudulent investments, with Eleanor's envy and Silas's greed as her tools. The forged notes, planted earring, and crashed stage light had been distractions, their purpose to mislead and confuse. Yet, as Poirot reviewed the evidence, a subtle discord gnawed at him. "The symphony is nearly complete, Hastings," he said, his voice low. "But there is a note out of tune." Poirot's unease stemmed from new information uncovered by Japp's team of his latest composition, as if it could anchor him. Hargrove, his mustache drooping, twisted his cufflinks, his relief at avoiding arrest fading under Poirot's scrutiny. "Monsieur," Poirot began, his accented voice sharp, "the truth has been revealed, but there are shadows yet to dispel. Let us shine a light." He turned to Victor, holding up the new will. "Monsieur Langford, you knew of this, did you not?" Victor's hands trembled, his voice barely audible. "She told me the night before the premiere. She wanted me to stand on my own, to prove I wasn't a failure." His admission confirmed he had motive beyond their quarrels. Isabella's death secured his inheritance without the burden of her conditions. But had he acted or merely benefited? Poirot's questions probed deeper. Victor's alibi, the smudged telegram, had been debunked, and his presence near the dressing room during their argument placed him at the scene. A new clue emerged. A stagehand recalled seeing Victor handling a vial in the prop room days earlier, though he claimed it was for research on theatrical effects. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A vial, monsieur? Perhaps one containing an alkaloid?" Victor denied it, but his flushed cheeks betrayed him. Hargrove's role also came under scrutiny. The ledger discrepancies, showing siphoned funds, suggested he had more to hide. A constable found a hidden account book in Hargrove's office, revealing payments to a chemist known for supplying rare substances. "Monsieur Hargrove," Poirot said, "you procured the poison, perhaps not for murder, but for another scheme." Hargrove stammered. "It was for cleaning solutions, for the theater." His excuse was flimsy, and the cigar ash near the substage trapdoor placed him closer to the crime's mechanics than he'd admitted. A fresh twist complicated the case. A torn page from Isabella's diary, found in the prop room, hinted at a secret meeting with an unknown figure, referred to only as the Shadow. The entry, dated the day of the premiere, read, "He knows my plans. I must confront him, or all..." Compartment's edge, suggesting a tool had been used to pry it open. The tool, a small crowbar, was found in the substage, its handle bearing traces of grease paint and a single dark hair. Victor's color, not Elena's. "Monsieur Langford," Poirot said, confronting him, "you accessed the panel, perhaps to check on your wife's fate." Victor's denial was weak, his hands shaking as he clutched his score. Hargrove's alibi crumbled further when Timothy Blaine, pushed to breaking, admitted his boss had left the lobby for nearly 10 minutes during the intermission, claiming to inspect the lighting, but seen near the dressing room corridor. The cigar ash, now matched to Hargrove's brand, placed him at the scene, and his nervous cufflink twisting suggested guilt beyond financial misdeeds. "I only checked on her," Hargrove insisted. "I heard nothing, saw nothing." But Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. The diary's shadow gnawed at Poirot. He interviewed the chorus girl who had seen the cloaked figure near the ventilation grate. Under gentle pressure, she recalled a detail. The figure wore a signet ring, its crest glinting in the dim light. Victor wore no such ring, but Hargrove's cufflinks bore a similar crest, tied to his family's minor nobility. "Monsieur Hargrove," Poirot said, "you met Madame Voss, did you not? To discuss her suspicions of your thefts." Hargrove's face paled, but he remained silent. Poirot pieced together a new theory. Isabella's discovery of Hargrove's embezzlement had prompted her to draft the new will, cutting Elena and pressuring Victor. Hargrove, desperate to protect his secrets, had supplied the poison, perhaps intending only to incapacitate her for the payout clause. Beatrice, sensing opportunity, had seized control, enlisting Elena and Silas to execute the murder, while Victor, aware of the will, may have played a passive role, ensuring his inheritance by silence. The evidence was circumstantial but mounting. The crowbar's hair, the cufflink crest, the diary's hint, all pointed to Hargrove's deeper involvement, though not as the mastermind. Victor's vile handling and case, though nearly closed, held one final act, and Poirot's grey cells were poised to unveil it. Chapter 9. The Final Curtain. The Larkspur Theatre, cloaked in the deepening shadows of a London evening, stood as a silent monument to the tragedy of Isabella Voss. The fog outside pressed against the windows, muffling the distant clatter of the city, while inside, the auditorium's chandeliers cast a faint, golden glow over empty seats. Hercule Poirot, his posture as precise as ever, stood in the dressing room, the epicenter of the mystery, his green eyes reflecting the flicker of a single gas lamp. The locked room puzzle had been cracked, Isabella's body hidden behind the mirror's secret panel, poisoned by an alkaloid-laced perfume vial. But lingering doubts had cast a shadow over the arrests of Lady Beatrice Farnsworth, Eleanor Moreau, and Silas Crowe. Captain Arthur Hastings, his notepad worn from furious scribbling, watched Poirot with a mix of anticipation and unease. Inspector Japp, his trench coat rumpled from hours of work, barked orders to his constables in the lobby, their footsteps echoing through the theatre's labyrinthine corridors. Poirot's mind, ever restless, churned over the new clues. The second will favoring Victor Langford, the diary entry about a shadowy figure, the crowbar with Victor's hair, and Reginald Hargrove's cufflink crest. The case, though nearly closed, held a final twist, a hidden thread that threatened to unravel the tapestry of guilt. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, his voice deliberate, "we have seen the actors, but the director of this tragedy remains in the wings. Let us bring them center stage." Poirot summoned the remaining players, Victor and Hargrove, to the auditorium, where the stage loomed like a courtroom. Victor, his composer's hands clutching a tattered score, looked hollowed out, his eyes darting nervously. Hargrove, his mustache drooping, twisted his cufflinks, their crest glinting faintly. Beatrice, Eleanor, and Silas, though in custody, were brought under guard, their faces a study in defiance. Roll grew clearer with a new discovery. A letter in his office, tucked inside a locked drawer, from the chemist who supplied the alkaloid. It confirmed Hargrove had requested a disabling agent, weeks before, ostensibly for cleaning, but suspiciously timed. "Monsieur Hargrove," Poirot said, "you procured the poison, perhaps intending only to incapacitate Madame Voss for your payout clause." Hargrove's face paled, his cufflinks stilled. I only wanted to delay her," he stammered. "Beatrice took it further." His admission painted him as an unwitting catalyst, his embezzlement the spark that Beatrice fanned into murder. The diary's shadow was the key. Poirot returned to the chorus girl's account of the cloaked figure with a signet ring. The crest matched Hargrove's cufflinks, tying him to the meeting Isabella described. "You confronted her," Poirot said, "about her suspicions of your thefts." Hargrove nodded, his voice hoarse. "She knew I'd been skimming funds. She threatened to expose me unless I resigned. I begged her to reconsider, but she locked the door." His presence at 8:45 p.m. placed him at the scene, but he claimed to have left before the murder. Poirot turned to Beatrice, her sapphire eyes cold despite her shackles. "Madame Farnsworth, you seized this opportunity," he said. "You knew the theater's secrets, your family's mirror panel, and used them to silence Madame Voss. The blueprint, the pearl beads, the rose from her greenhouse, and the blue cloak all pointed to her." Beatrice's lips curled. "She would have ruined me," she said. "Her fortune was my salvation." She had orchestrated the plan, enlisting Elena to lace the vial and Silas to move the body, creating the illusion of a disappearance. But a final twist emerged. The crashed stage light, initially blamed on Silas, bore 2 cuts, one clean, one frayed. Poirot's examination revealed a hidden timer, a mechanical device rigged to delay the fall. "This was no mere sabotage," he said. "It was a moving her body to the compartment. Beatrice, cloaked, planted the hair and notes, exiting via the service tunnel. By 9:05, the room was empty, the rose a mocking signature. Victor, checking on his wife, found her body and, coerced by Beatrice, kept silent, rigging the light as his only rebellion. The evidence was complete. The chemist's letter, the timer's ink, the crowbar's hair, the cufflink crest, and the diary's entry sealed the case. Japp, his jaw set, ordered Beatrice, Elena, and Silas held for murder and conspiracy. Hargrove faced charges for embezzlement and accessory, his role in supplying the poison undeniable. Victor, though guilty of concealment, was spared arrest, his confession and the light's sabotage seen as acts of redemption. "You have suffered enough, monsieur," Poirot said gently. The auditorium grew still as the suspects were led away. Beatrice's defiance crumbled, her head bowed. Elena's sobs echoed, her dreams of fame shattered. Silas's silence was stoic, his debts now irrelevant. Hargrove, broken, muttered about the theater's ruin. Victor lingered, staring at the stage where Isabella had shone, his score falling to the floor. Poirot stepped to the stage's edge, the empty seats, a silent witness. "The truth," he told Hastings, "is a light that burns away deception. Madame Voss's star shines still. Injustice." Hastings nodded, his eyes misty. "You've given her peace, Poirot," he said. "But how do you untangle such a web?" Poirot's smile was faint. "The grey cells, mon ami. See the pattern where others see chaos." The theatre, cleansed of its secrets, prepared to reopen. The opera would continue, a new soprano taking Isabella's place. The tragedy, now a legend, Poirot adjusted his tie. His work done. "The final curtain falls," he said, "but the stage is never truly empty." He led Hastings out, the fog swallowing their figures, leaving the Larkspur to its ghosts and its future. Chapter 10. Echoes of Justice. The fortune, manipulating Elena Moreau's ambition and Silas Crow's desperation. Reginald Hargrove's embezzlement and Victor Langford's complicity had added layers of complexity, but Poirot's meticulous logic had exposed the truth. The poisoned perfume vial, the blood-red rose, the hidden mirror panel, and the blue cloak in the basement crate. The second will, the diary's shadow, and the sabotaged stage light had sealed the case, revealing the full scope of the crime. Now, as the theater prepared to reopen, Poirot stood to deliver the final act, ensuring every detail resonated with clarity. He gathered the remaining figures, Victor Langford, Reginald Hargrove, and Timothy Blaine, in the green room, where the air still carried faint traces of grease paint and roses. Beatrice, Elena, and Silas, now in custody, awaited their fate, their confessions secured. Victor, his composer's hands clutching the faded photograph of Isabella, looked broken, his eyes hollow with grief. Hargrove, his managerial bravado extinguished, sat slumped, his cufflinks discarded, his mustache drooping. Timothy, the young assistant, stood resolute, his determination to save the Larkspur a flicker of hope in the gloom. "Messieurs," Poirot began, his accented voice steady and deliberate, "the tragedy of Madame Voss is concluded, but its echoes must guide us forward. Let us honor her with truth." Poirot recounted the crime's mechanics with precision. At 8:45 p.m., Isabella entered her dressing room, unaware that Elena, under Beatrice's orders, had laced her perfume vial with a rare alkaloid poison. Hargrove, after confronting Isabella about his embezzlement, left her alive but shaken, his cufflink crest tying him to the diary's shadow. At 8:47, as Isabella inhaled the toxin, she collapsed, her death silent and swift. Silas, using the theater's secret mirror panel, a relic of the Farnsworth family's design, slid her body into the hidden compartment. Beatrice, cloaked in blue, planted the blonde hair, forged notes, and the poisoned rose, escaping via the service tunnel. By 9:05, payout clause. Hargrove's shoulders sagged. "I never meant for murder," he said, his voice barely audible. "Beatrice twisted my plan." His embezzlement, uncovered by Isabella's diary, had made him vulnerable. His confrontation with her, the catalyst for Beatrice's scheme. The cufflink crest and cigar ash placed him near the scene, marking him as an accessory. Beatrice's confession, extracted by Japp, revealed her desperation. "Isabella knew of my fraud," she had said, her pride shattered. "Her fortune was my only way out." The pearl beads, the blue cloak, the rose from her greenhouse, and the Farnsworth blueprint confirmed her role as the architect. Elena, lured by the promise of fame and inheritance, had been her tool, her jealousy a perfect lever. Silas, bound by gambling debts paid by Beatrice, had executed the mechanics, his knowledge of the theater's secrets essential. Poirot addressed the red herrings with clarity. The blonde hair, meant to over-implicate Elena, was Beatrice's miscalculation. The forged notes, "Meet me at midnight, V," and "Betrayal costs dear, S," were her attempts to sow confusion, their handwriting betraying a single author. The earring in Victor's pocket was another plant, designed to keep him silent. The crashed stage light, a dual act by Silas to silence Elena and Victor to expose the crime, had been the final clue, its frayed cut revealing Victor's intervention.
The evidence was unassailable. The alkaloid in the vial and rose, the blood traces in the compartment, the blueprint, the chemist's letter, the crowbar's hair, the cufflink crest, and the diary's entry. Japp, his jaw set, confirmed the charges. Beatrice, Elena, and Silas for murder and conspiracy. Hargrove for accessory and fraud. Victor faced lesser charges for concealment, his cooperation noted.
It's a clean case, Japp said, clapping Poirot on the shoulder. You've tied it up tighter than a drum.
Poirot turned to the theatre's future.
Monsieur Blaine, he said, his eyes on Timothy, you have the spirit to rebuild. The Larkspur must sing again.
His eyes, misty, said, You've given her justice, Poirot. Her story lives on. Poirot's smile was wistful. The grey cells, mon ami, they seek the truth, but the heart seeks its echo. He gestured to the empty stage, imagining Isabella's voice soaring once more, her presence woven into the theatre's fabric. The Larkspur prepared to reopen, a new soprano already auditioning, the opera's tragedy now a legend. The newspapers buzzed with headlines. Belgian sleuth solves soprano's murder. The scandal would draw crowds, Timothy's determination ensuring the theatre's survival. Poirot, ever unassuming, prepared to leave, his work complete. The stage is never truly empty, he said, adjusting his tie. It holds the echoes of those who shone upon it. As he and Hastings stepped into the morning light, the fog fully lifted, London streets alive with promise. The Larkspur stood behind them, its doors ready to welcome a new act, its ghosts laid to rest. Poirot's grey cells, satisfied, turned to the next mystery, while Isabella's legacy, her voice, her passion, her truth, echoed on, a melody that would never fade.